podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Welcome to Humans of Speedway, the podcast which gives you the chance to get to know the stars and unsung heroes of one of the most exhilarating sports in the world. My guest in this episode is Chris Louis. As the son of one of the best-known riders of the 1970s, former British champion and world number 3 John Tiger Louis, the sport was always going to be in Chris's blood. And Chris very much followed in his dad's footsteps by himself becoming British champion and reaching world number 3. He was also captain of what many believe to be British Speedway's best ever team, the Ipswich side of 1998. A team which featured the likes of Tomaz Gollob and world champion of that year, Tony Rickardsson. And they went on to claim an unprecedented league and cup treble. He rode in the Speedway Grand Prix series for 7 years, right from its first years in 1995, and including being part of the very first Cardiff Grand Prix. Since his riding days, his involvement with the Witches has continued as team manager and now co-promoter of the team, and Chris is also at the top table of the sport in the UK as a director of British Speedway Promoters Limited. And as well as getting to know more about Chris's career, we'll also discover what his dream meeting would look like and who would make his dream team. So with that in mind, welcome Chris. Do you know much about Speedway?
Not a lot, no. You make it sound like I should, to be honest.
I'm sure that you do. Let's start at the very beginning. Obviously, we know how you would have got involved in Speedway because your dad was right at the top of his game in your younger years. But what are your earliest memories of Speedway and of your dad riding and of that sport being around your family, of course, at that time?
Well, my earliest memories don't include watching much Speedway, to be honest. It was more running around trees with a Coke can on my foot, pretending to be a Speedway rider. So, obviously it was in my blood from the very beginning. And I guess, I think I was probably, someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but I was 5 or 6 years old, walking down to the Twin Towers at Wembley to watch the 75 final that Dad obviously came third in. And that is probably one of my earliest memories as far as Speedway goes. It was such a massive thing. I mean, I don't know what the crowd was that day, but it was 90-odd thousand, I guess. So to be walking down there in amongst that lot was really quite special.
Yeah, and that would have been a similar time. You were, 5, 6 years old, as you mentioned. Your dad was a British champion then and really, at the top of the sport in this country. And what were the memories of how that changed things, him becoming British champion and the extra maybe focus that brought him?
Yeah, I mean, even as a youngster, obviously I was very young, so I don't fully appreciate it. Certainly didn't at the time. But, I think even then I noticed there was greater media attention. I mean, it was, national and world media that were sort of talking to him then. So, it was noticeable, people, different strangers coming to the house and things that maybe wasn't quite so apparent before. So, yeah, it did make a change, obviously to Dad's life and to the whole family, really.
And I've spoken to 1 or 2 riders who've had parents involved in the sport. I think Kelvin Tatum was one of them, where his dad was a really good grass track rider, well-known grass track rider, but sort of discouraged Kelvin a little bit from getting fully involved, perhaps. Was that the same with you? Did your dad actively encourage you to get involved in Speedway, or was it one of those kind of, you don't want to get involved in this business, son? Get yourself a proper job. How was it?
Certainly, Dad didn't discourage me from getting into Speedway, but I don't think there was any sort of encouragement. I guess there's no push to be a Speedway rider. It was just a case of do what you enjoy, and I enjoyed riding bikes from when I think I had my first motorbike when I was about 3 years old. So it was in my blood right from the beginning. And I went off. I rode for fun. I rode grass track competitively till I was 13. I think I'd had a little bit of a go at trials, but it wasn't quite quick enough for me. And then when I won the British Championship at grass track, I went off and raced motocross. So Speedway wasn't really on the agenda at all. I literally, it was just one day I woke up and I'd had a couple of injuries racing motocross, namely my knee, which was always going to give me a problem. And I phoned a mate one day borrowed a van, stole my dad's bike that he'd kept, the old Westlake from his last racing season. And we made our way down to Hackney, got lost on the way, middle of London, trying to find out where we were going, and had a practice session down there, and that's where it all started, really.
Wow, what a machine to start on, though.
The old Wesley, it was good, not particularly reliable, I have to say. Neither of us at that time had any clue about a speedway bike or how it operated, so we were getting a lot of advice once we got down to the practice session at Hackney. But it was a good day. I got back, parked the bike in the workshop. Typical teenager at the time, didn't bother to wash it or anything. And Dad came in the house a couple of days later, having gone in the garage, and said, "My bike's dirty. Have you been out on it?"
How do you explain that one? It's the evidence is kind of there, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So that was it. I had about 3 practice sessions, I think, ahead of the 88 season at Hackney, and that was me started. In between, I went off and done the Dakar, which was quite a big thing at that age to be doing. So it was a big year for me, or everything going on.
So bikes were a big part of your life, of course. It was more kind of which sort of discipline you were going to follow. And you mentioned the Dakar there, which, as you say, a big thing to do. And is that something you've ever thought of doing since? Where did that fit into your life?
Well, yeah. I mean, the guy that I did it with, Dick Partridge, he did mention to me a couple of years ago that it was the 30th anniversary since we actually did it, and he did sort of say in the year leading up to that, fancy doing it again, and we'll celebrate the anniversary. And I have to say, it was really hard to turn down. I was so keen, but sort of looking at the finances and looking at everything else I had to do and the time it was going to take, wasn't really on the cards. But I have to say, as things calm down later on in life, it's hard to do as you get older, but I'd still consider it.
Don't rule it out just yet. We hear a lot of stories of people doing grass track and then finding speedway and then not looking back particularly. I mean, I know there's a lot of riders that still do both, but speedway certainly a lot smoother on the joints, if nothing else. But a great training ground, though, for a lot of great speedway riders over the time, and something that maybe is not producing new talent maybe quite as much as it used to, would you say?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the numbers just aren't there. The amount of clubs and the amount of riders is nothing like it was when I was a youngster. So it's diminished to a point where it's not sort of really providing any riders to speedway. So we have to look towards other sports that obviously have kids racing, namely motocross. That's where that's actually where Dad came from in the first place. All those years ago, and in effect, you could say I did too, because that's what I was doing when I then decided to take up speedway. So, and it's the main sort of breeding ground for the youngsters now that we could get involved in speedway. And there was a program, I would say probably 10, 12 years ago, where we looked at the motocross sort of fraternity and started to bring a few over, and quite successfully. Some very good riders have got motocross backgrounds that we're now watching. And I think it's something that we need to revisit for sure. And
we've seen this a few times with other riders I've spoken to. They go along to a training school and whatever, and you get spotted, and naturally you progress into the team, and that's what's happened with you with Hackney. Yeah,
that was, as I said, I went down, had about 3 practice sessions that winter, and Dave Pavitt was promoter then, and along with Dad, Mike Weston, Gary Muckley, there was a few involved down at Hackney at the time, and Dave dragged me in the office and said, "Look, we'll give you a team spot." And I said, "Yeah, I've only had 3 practice sessions. It's a bit early days for that." And he was adamant that he wanted to do it. So we had a probably about a half-hour chat, and I said, "Well, look, I don't have a bike, I don't have a van." Making demands already, I haven't even ridden. So he provided one of the bikes, and I had to provide the van. I went away all smiles, thinking, "Okay, I'm going to be a speedway rider." And Dad had no idea at that stage, so then when he was told, he was adamant that it was far too early. I'd only ridden a bike 3 times, and there's no way I could go into competitive racing the following season. But he lost out on that one, and that's where it started.
And it was a decent start, a very decent team in 1988 at Hackney, because you became National League champion and you also won the Knockout Cup as well. And when you hear some of the names in that team, then you'll probably not be surprised at the success. Can you remember some of your teammates from that era at Hackney?
Oh God, I hope I can remember everybody. There was myself, Andy Galvin, Mark Lorham, Alan Mogridge, Paul Whittaker, Gary Rolls, Paul Bosley. That's 7. I think we alternated a couple of reserves, so there was probably someone else. But Barry Thomas. How can I forget Baz?
Wow.
It was a good side. Obviously, it won the triple or double or whatever it was in those days. But more importantly for me, particularly as a sort of first year, it was a fun side. Everybody was just behind everybody, and particularly me because I was very, very new to the sport. I think it was those guys that kind of moulded my career really, and the start that they gave me and all the help they gave me.
Yeah, I think you tend to find that, I think, in any walk of life, the people who are there right at the very start, and, you make that good group of friends that stick with you. And that's important with Speedway, and not just with other riders, but I suppose mechanics and other people that Speedway riders work with. You tend to find that quite a lot of them do stick with riders through the course, or certainly through a good part of their career as well. Did you have a particular mechanic team, so not necessarily a team that you had all the time, but go-to mechanics that helped you out through the course of the seasons?
Yeah, I mean, there was sort of one man that was the constant for me. Ironically, when I had that first year at Hackney, sort of very disorganised, having had no experience and no time really to prepare for it, going off for the Dakar as well in between, took another 6 weeks, probably more, 2 months out of my sort of prep time for that. So literally only weeks before the first meeting at Hackney that year, I asked a local guy, Nigel Wells, look, you've got a tiny bit of experience mechanically. He worked in a car garage, but he'd helped someone with grass track, Lawrence Bloomfield, and he said, look, I'll come and give you a hand if you've got no one, but you need to sort someone out because I'm not the man for the job. He said, I'll give you a couple of weeks to sort yourself out, and he was still there 20 odd years later at the end. So he's no longer with us, unfortunately. But he was a great guy. He was someone. He's that constant. I think every rider should try to have. It's not always possible, of course. Life changes things. But for me, I knew right all the way through my career that he was right beside me and he would be honest with me. So if it came down to me wanting to blame, I don't know, the bikes, whatever. If it was, he'd be honest. If it wasn't, he'd also be honest and say, no, you need to sort yourself out, you need to start riding properly. So, I could always trust what he had to say. It was great.
It's almost like a golfer and caddy kind of relationship, isn't it? I think in some ways as well, especially when you've got that same person who's with you meeting after meeting.
Yeah, it's that constant. It's that face that you can trust. And, many a time in good, bad, indifferent, difficult situations, I could sit in my pitch chair and look up and listen to what he had to say. And, as a rider, you need to be strong in your own decisions. And it would never put doubt in my mind. If I knew what I wanted, great, he would just get on with the job. If he could see I was indifferent towards something, he would just help me make that decision, basically. And
what help you had as well, because having only started in Speedway in 1988, by 1990 you're World Under-21 champion, and then by 1991 you're in a British final and you're on the podium alongside Kelvin Tatum and Gary Havelock. I mean, what a rise!
To be honest, I don't remember too much about it, but I know it was a big day. I mean, those British final days were something else. Going to Coventry was just something special. I mean, the crowd was massive. You drive up. I can't remember the roads used now. It wasn't the A14 all the way, but you drive up the A45 or whatever it was in them days to Coventry, and there'd be Ipswich flags hanging out of windows. You'd pass dozens and dozens of cars that were all going to Coventry, and it was the same for every rider wherever they were coming from. They would have their fans on the road, and they were special days. They really were.
Up go the tapes and away they roar, and straight away it's Doncaster and Andy Smith. Doncaster and Andy Smith driving into the first and second turn, and Chris Louis taking the inside line, and Chris Louis drives underneath Doncaster. So Chris Louis back to pole position. Doncaster second, Andy Smith third, and number 7 on its back. It's Chris Louis who gets to the checker flag, who wins. Jeremy Doncaster in second place, and in third place was Andy Smith.
The British final remains a massive part of British Speedway's calendar, but when we look back at that era of Coventry and the British finals in the 80s and the 90s, and it was also a stepping stone for any Brit who wanted to be world champion. You had to come through that event, so it also had that riding on it as well. And a huge meetup of Speedway fans from around the country, perhaps a void that's been filled by Cardiff to an extent, but as a rider you must have obviously felt that sense of a massive occasion too.
Yeah, I think throughout the 80s, well, previous to that, of course, as well, but certainly right up until through the 90s, you went to a British final, and the lineup was packed with genuine world-class riders that, you know, had been in world finals or in their World Team Cup squad or whatever, you know, and they were all class riders. So yeah, very rarely was there necessarily a surprise or an upset, because you just felt that anybody on their day could go and win those meetings.
You made history in 1993 and you qualified for your first world final, but the thing that made history was that you were the first son of a former world finalist to also qualify for a world final, and it was in Pocking in Germany, which must have been an interesting place to go at that time, because just a few years down the road from the wall coming down, and Germany was obviously quite a transitional place to be at that time, and probably quite a different track to the likes of Ipswich and Brandon and wherever you'd been riding in this country too.
Yeah, it was different. I mean, fortunately, doing the under-21 stuff, you know, I'd travelled quite a bit in my Speedway career sort of prior to that, so that was good. It sort of got me used to the various different aspects of being in these different countries, particularly at that time, as you say, you know, things were changing quite rapidly in the late 80s, early 90s. So, but yeah, I was kind of well prepared in that respect. I had travelled quite a bit, which was what the under-21 stuff was really good for. You know, it kind of moved you on quite quickly. So I think it was important to be a part of that. And yeah, 93 Pocking World Final. All a bit of a whirlwind, really. Qualified for for my first one, only 3 or 4 years into my career, and you know, that in itself for me was enough. I thought, you know, it's great. I've made it to a world final. Everybody tells me, you know, and there was lots of rounds involved to get there at that point. And for me, it included a couple of runoffs. Certainly, I think the last stage in Vetlanda was a runoff with a quality bunch. So I felt I'd achieved something just to get there, and you know, Nigel was there alongside me, and I had Nicky Lanham, Lee Lanham's brother, working for me at the time. We were all quite young, relatively inexperienced in Speedway terms when you looked around the pits for the world final. So whilst I wouldn't say we certainly weren't there to make up the numbers, I don't think we had overly high expectations, and it all seemed to go quite well, really. We battled hard all day and ended up on the podium.
Pierwsze miejsce i mistrz świata w roku 1993 Samer Molenko. Srebrny medal Hans Nielsen, Dania. Brązowy medal Chris Lewis.
And in that meeting, you were going into it, obviously, as a British representative in a world final, which is obviously going to be a massive deal. But you were going into it with Gary Havelock, who was the reigning world champion as well. I mean, did that take some of the focus off you, having Javi in that final going in as the reigning champ, and all the expectation perhaps on him?
Yeah, there was. And that probably helped me, actually, because there was probably a lot of focus on Gary. He wasn't riding quite as well as he obviously had done in 92 when he was unstoppable. But yeah, there was a lot of focus there, and it took it off myself. So I think that helped alleviate some of the pressure. And yeah, we just stuck to things. Things went well on the day. We didn't have any bike issues. We weren't really struggling to find out what was working and what wasn't. We made good decisions, and just fantastic. You know, Sam obviously famously went out on a different bike and finished last. To win it with 12 points, and left myself and Hans on 11 to scrap it out in a runoff. But I have to say, you know, podium, second or third really doesn't make any difference. You're either the winner or you're not. But a very enjoyable day.
And obviously you'd performed at the highest level in the under-21s, but this was your introduction to the international scene, your first world final, finishing on the podium. You qualified for the subsequent world final in 1994, the last proper world final at Voyens, which didn't go quite as well, but then you were involved in the early incarnations of the Grand Prix and really introducing yourself to that international stage.
Yeah, I'd sort of found my consistency at the sort of world level, and it was going quite well. Voyens was disappointing. I wanted to build on the third place. It was kind of almost the opposite to Pocking. We didn't make good decisions as far as the bike setup, which bike indeed to ride and things. So, it wasn't ideal, that one. But obviously we all knew that the Grand Prix series was coming up. And again, everybody wanted to perform well, not knowing what the lineup was going to be for the Grand Prix series and exactly how we were all going to qualify for it. So, sort of left Voyens quite despondent, quite disappointed, but as it was, got into the Grand Prix series and it all went on from there.
And the 1995 Grand Prix series started at Wrocław, and you actually finished on the podium in your very first meeting. But the GP series have changed over the years, haven't they, in terms of the format and how they look? We had that era where you had to qualify from the first part of the meeting to reach the second part of the meeting, and then there was one with various finals involved in it, and obviously now it's as we know, it's straight through and then semi-final and final. But the series itself has also changed, because in the first year there was only 6 rounds, and the British Grand Prix took place at Hackney Wick. So the series as a whole has changed its look quite a lot.
Yeah, well, there's been 3. Initially, you just went through the heats to 4 finals. I think the D, C, B, and A finals, and then it got reincarnated to a thing where if you ran 2 last or 2 third or last, you were out. That was not well received. I don't think particularly by fans, and certainly not by riders. But the initial one was okay. You just went into the 4 different finals. I think the system they've got now is the best that's probably been used for the Grand Prix.
And we're on the cusp now of a new deal for the Speedway Grand Prix over the next 10 years, which is going to be big for all Speedway, surely. But even in this last year, hearing how much some of the riders have been earning, particularly Bartosz Szmartlik, for example, taking home the equivalent of £500,000, not just from the Grand Prix, but from Polish Speedway as well. Certainly the pay and conditions have changed a little bit, haven't they?
The top riders, the very top riders in the world now with Grand Prix and Sweden, and they're generally doing Sweden, maybe Denmark, and of course Poland, which is seen as the biggest league in the world, quite rightly at the moment. Those guys at the top of that are earning very, very good money. Makes me quite jealous, really.
I suspect you're not the only one as well. Coming up then on Humans of Speedway, we'll continue our chat with Chris Louis, and next we turn our attention to the year of 1998, because Chris Louis didn't just become British champion in 1998, he was part of arguably the best British Speedway team of all time. What was it like riding with some of the all-time greats of the sport? All on the way here on Humans of Speedway. This is Humans of Speedway. I'm Ian Brannan, and my guest in this episode is Chris Louis, who's current co-promoter of the Ipswich Witches, but a long history with the Ipswich Witches stretching back pretty much his entire career. And in 1998, a team was assembled which many argue is the best team ever to grace the British League. And on this podcast, where we've asked previous guests to name their dream team that they'd love to see in action, and Ipswich 1998 has been mentioned a number of times. Chris Louis was the captain of that side, and it was a side that features the likes of Tomaz Gollob, Tony Rickardsson in the year that he became world champion, Scott Nichols, a very young Scott Nichols, was part of that side as well, and yourself too. And as I say, many people say the best British team of all time. Yeah,
I'd like to argue it's the best of all time in this country, but I would, wouldn't I? It was fabulous. It was just such a fun year. It reminded me very much. It was 10 years on from my first season, which actually on a I guess smaller scale in the second division was the same. It was just good fun, full of confidence. We went to every meeting, and you could see the look on the faces of riders, mechanics, management of the opposition, that as you walked into the pits, they were kind of wondering how many they were going to lose by. So it has to be said, it was huge fun. I mean, yeah, when you look at that team, I think you had the Swedish champion, the Polish champion, the British champion, the under-21 British champion, the Czech champion. It just went on and on and on. I think myself, Tony and Thomas were 1, 3 and 5 by the end of the season in the world. It's hard to imagine teams like that in the near future, but I hope we can get back to something like that.
And you were the captain of that team, Tomaz Gollob, and
I didn't have to do very much.
Well, I was going to say, how do you inspire riders like that? Who, I mean, Tony Rickardsson was charging through the world at that point, wasn't he, as well? And Tomaz Gollob not far behind. It took him a while to get his world title, but these are all sort of top riders. It's sort of set it up and point it in the right direction, pretty much. Is it that job?
It was a strange dynamic in that team. My job as captain was never to inspire Tony or Thomas into doing their best. They were more than capable of doing that themselves. It was to make sure that certainly between myself, Tony and Thomas, that we got the best out of Sal, Tony Svab, and Scott, obviously being sort of the youngster in the team. That was the focus for the three of us. As far as the dynamic goes at the top of the team, we were very competitive. In a sort of in a good way, we were competitive. But you got to heat sort of 15 at the end of the meeting, and you were paired with, or in my case, I was paired with 9 times out of 10 either Tony or Thomas. And really, at that point, we generally speaking, we'd won the meeting, certainly at home, and in a lot of cases away from home. And it was a case of beating your teammate by as much as possible so that he knew you meant business in the Grand Prix at the weekend, that sort of thing. So it was a strange dynamic, but it worked very well.
And well, that's it. Ipswich are the 1998 Elite League champions. Well done to them. When what a reception down the back straight. Tomaz Gollob, well, he wins the final race then, or the heat number 11 rather, and it's the race that gives the title to Ipswich this evening. Well done to them. They move into an unassailable 20-point lead.
The trophy you won for winning the league, though, was a proper Speedway trophy back then. It was a tyre mounted on a plinth, and we don't see many trophies like that these days.
No, we don't, and there's a very special story to that particular trophy that year, because it developed a terrible smell, and we couldn't quite work out what it was until we found out that Shane Parker had put a kipper in there before it was presented to us.
Why doesn't that surprise me?
No, it didn't surprise us at the time either, but it just took too long to find out. By then the smell was dreadful.
Unbelievable. Well, we do have a Shane Parker episode from way back when, if people want to catch up with that. But you listen to the Shane Parker episode and you'll hear, because there was all sorts of japes that went on, because he rode for Kings Lynn and Ipswich over the time, didn't he? And I think he was always wise to each other's, each of the tricks that went on, I suppose, with tracks and all sorts of stuff, driving tractors, hosing down Kevin, and all these kind of things.
Yeah, the relationship between Kingsley and Ipswich was never lost on Shane. Having ridden for both of them, he fully appreciated what each of them thought about each other.
And then you regained the British title in 2000. Which one is the one that's sweeter than the other? Because I think sometimes riders win a trophy or whatever it is, and because of the whirlwind that surrounds the first one, that sometimes they enjoy the second the best.
I enjoyed them both. Obviously, on the night. And just winning the event, it was something that obviously, you set targets in your career, and a national title is certainly one of them, along with world titles and club titles and various other things. So I know that winning the British title always meant an awful lot to me. As I sort of said at the beginning of this, that it was such a big day. It was a massive thing. I don't know really. I thoroughly enjoyed obviously the first one, and that is special because it's a target you set yourself, and then to achieve it is great, to hold that trophy aloft. The second one I seem to remember It rained all night from the very beginning to the very end, and the track was quite difficult. And I'd always been told that I couldn't ride difficult tracks. So I think there was a certain amount of pride in that one, pulling it off in difficult conditions. And I had a point to prove that I could do it. And they were great years. I mean, at that time, it seemed like myself and Mark seemed to share the title. He would win it one year, then me, then him, then me, and it sort of went on like that. So, and you've seen it in more recent times, in particular with Chris Harrison Scott, obviously. So, that's how it was going. But no, it's something that I'm very, very proud of, and I won 2 and Dad only won 1, which I often remind him of.
And what's the reply when you remind him?
Well, he hasn't really got a comeback because he got a 3rd in the world and so did I. So there's not nowhere else to go.
So it's just that extra British title is what separates you.
One thing I've got on him, yeah.
Now, talking about international speedway and world speedway, of course, you were in the one-off world finals, but then the Speedway Grand Prix series came along, and you rode in that from 1995 to 2001 regularly as a full-time GP rider, which probably a lot of people forget about those early days of the Speedway Grand Prix. But then 2001 was the year where Cardiff began, and things changed massively in terms of the scale of the meetings. And not only did you ride in the very first Cardiff Grand Prix, but you also rode in the very first heat of the very first Cardiff Grand Prix, so really making new ground. What did you think, though, of the idea when it was first mooted that they were going to put a temporary track in a massive stadium like that, and that was going to be the future of Grand Prix Speedway in this country?
Probably like everybody else when it was announced. I think it was announced at a British Grand Prix in Coventry, and when it was announced, there was a lot of sort of shock horror on faces, and I was probably no different to 99% of other people who said, "Well, that will never work." And it's it's on the calendar. It's still on the calendar. It's the biggest, I would argue, biggest speedway meeting in the world. And it's been fantastic. And, I was lucky, obviously, to be in the first one.
What a night! The biggest night in British Speedway since the halcyon days of Wembley nearly 20 years ago. 24 of the world's top riders, one of the world's best stadia. And, well, around 40,000 fans here have crammed to get in.
And it's an experience that, I'll never forget, walking out to that noise and that atmosphere of that stadium with the roof shut. Really was quite special, and it never got any less in the other couple of meetings that I did in Cardiff, and then also working for TV. It just walking out there with my headset on to go out and do my work for Sky Television. You still couldn't help but have the hairs go up on the back of your neck, because it's just such an atmosphere, particularly when you're in the bottom of it, in the heart of it, with all those people around you.
Yeah, and the roof being closed just changes the whole sound of the sport as well, doesn't it? The engines sound different, the crowd obviously sounds different. You've got and you've got the knowledge as well, knowing that it's not going to get rained off, which is another beautiful thing, that you're definitely going to be going ahead. And the amount of people, I know that when we spoke to Scott Nichols, he said that really for a lot of the riders, it's dealing with the size of the crowd and the occasion is as big a challenge as dealing with the riders that you're battling against on the track.
It's the whole thing, and it's exactly what makes it special. There's not one element that makes Cardiff stand out from other big, Grand Prix and other big speedway events. It's the whole thing. It starts when you arrive in Cardiff. Cardiff is a relatively small city that's condensed all around the stadium pretty much. So as soon as you walk towards the stadium, you've got hordes of people, that are blowing their air horns and asking for signatures and taking photographs. And, it just starts with that, which makes it feel different to many other stadiums that you generally just drive to and you get in and that's it sort of thing. So it starts there, and then you've got the pit area, which is in the underbelly of the stadium. It's not like any other pit area in any stadium that I've been to. Obviously, there have been one or two others since Cardiff, but and it's just this long sort of not dark, but sort of enclosed area that everyone just seems on top of each other. They're all grouped there together, and then when you do ride out or you walk out for the parade or drive out, whatever it is, you go up that hill, and then it just opens up to the most amazing noise and visuals and everything in the stadium.
He's number 6 in his end. The takes right. Chris has made a good start off 3. No doubt about the leader here, Bo Grell. Second at the moment is yet from Jensen. Here comes Chris Louis down the back straight. Chris is going to go wide into the dirt. This is a good ride from Chris Louis. Bo Grell has the lead, but Chris is hanging on there in that second spot. This would be good enough, and he's up against his Ipswich teammate Jesper Jensen.
Like I said early on, the inside's working. Now there's a bit of dirt coming to the outside, and Chris is racing around the outside there. Found a little bit extra just to get into second place, and that's all he needs at the moment. Keep going.
It's a very, very clever, intelligent ride from Chris Louis. He's riding the lines to perfection here. Bo Grell, a vastly experienced rider, the 38-year-old Czech Republic man, not currently in British Speedway, but still capable of doing the business. And this will be a terrific effort from Chris if he hangs on, because he's coming under pressure now from Lucas Tribble. Lucas Tribble will go high, wide, and into the dirt, but Chris Louis has done it up, and the fans celebrate there because we have another British survivor. Chris Louis will move on to heat number 11, and that will be a fine achievement for Chris.
Yeah, it's everything. It's just a whole different ballgame, and even the fact that the noise is different because the roof is shut. There's so many different elements that make it what it is. It's a one-off for sure.
And it's great to have it back on the calendar as well, because I think there's a bit of concern, as there tends to be sometimes when meetings aren't held or clubs, as we've seen, stop for whatever reason. I think that with the change of the rights in the Grand Prix, a lot of people worried that Cardiff might go, but I think it's great to have it back, and not just one meeting but 2 meetings as well. It's going to make for a different but exciting weekend for Speedway fans.
Yeah, it's massive. I mean, the pandemic obviously changed a lot of things for a lot of people, and we lost Cardiff because of it. But I think it was always going to come back. It was never off the table forever. And Discovery Events have obviously now launched their vision and what they're proposing to do in the future for World Speedway, and it was massive. I watched the whole thing through, and really looking forward to what they're going to do with the sport, particularly from the under-16s, the under-21, and of course the youth programs that they're looking at. And yeah, I think it's in very safe hands.
And then inevitably the point came where riding was probably not the best thing for you to be doing. You had some quite bad injuries, and natural progression for you, with your dad, of course, was a promoter at Ipswich, was to join that side of the family business, if you like, and yourself become involved in running the club, and you've been promoter and you've been team manager, of course, as well. Tell us about that transition from rider to management, if you like.
Well, first of all, I can say that the riding days were much easier. All by the injuries, obviously. I'd actually retired twice. I did retire in 2002 when I broke my back. That was early part of the Swedish season, so that was like mid-April, I guess, end of April. And then I had the rest of 2002 out. Joined Dad at the club for 2003 as a promoter. And then we were building the team for 2004, and there was one spot left. My last average fitted the bill. I liked the look of the team. We were struggling to find another rider, so I made the decision to come out of retirement and carry on, which I did reasonably successfully for another 4 years. Another injury in 2008. It was just another injury because I'd done a kneecap and a collarbone and one or two other things in that time, which, to be fair, in the main part of my career, I sort of steer clear of all those types of injuries. So it just started to gang up on me a bit. The body was getting older and harder to recover quickly from. And then there was the shoulder injury 2008, which just sort of eventually ended my career. I was told at the time it was a career-ending injury. I think had I been younger and felt I still wanted to achieve in the sport, then I think I would have come back from it, to be honest, and could have come back. It would have been very, very hard recovery, but I could have come back from it. But at that point, it was time to throw the towel in and try the other side of it.
And I think we've seen that with a few people who obviously still live the excitement of Speedway through management or being involved in whatever way. And I suspect for you, it's one of those things you were never going to be far away from Speedway, particularly with your family involvement at Ipswich as well. But even with that knowledge, what are the things that perhaps surprised you, or the things that you learnt going from being a rider to being a co-promoter or a team manager that maybe you didn't appreciate when you were an out-and-out rider?
Well, I think that's probably hard to answer on the basis that over the years, the sport's ebbed and flowed. And over the years in my time, the transition period from rider to promoter, it's got tougher to promote. You're running the club on the breadline all of the time. There isn't a big surplus of cash. If there was, we'd still have the top riders riding in this country. Running the sport, even in my relatively short promoting time span of 10 years, maybe slightly longer, it's got tougher and tougher and tougher. And then the last couple of years in particular have been the toughest. We've had the pandemic to contend with, alongside Poland deciding that they're going to do their contracts that stop riders sort of riding in the many leagues. And the money that they've been able to pay, they've engineered their position. So this is not getting the violin out and saying, Poland's all Poland's fault. They've played a great game and they are where they are. It's our job now to look at them as they did us 15 years ago when we had the Sky TV contract, or the first media contract. And they said that's where we need to be. They've done that. They've copied our model and vastly improved it. So it's time to battle back.
Some of the other problems that have been encountered have been both related to COVID, of course, COVID restrictions, but also Brexit affecting travel between other countries around Europe and riders being able to get visas where previously they could just come, but now there's a big application process involved. And you yourself have been victim to that at Ipswich with, for example, Nikolai Klint, finding that that the logistics just didn't work out this season. That's not to say that they won't in a subsequent season. And also the restrictions in Poland as well, with the top league restricting riders in where they can ride if they're part of the Extraliga. What can British Speedway do to be more in command of and in control of their destiny and future?
A lot of things have sort of converged all at the same time to make life, a lot more difficult than maybe it has been. The thing with the pandemic, you used Nikolai as an example, hopefully was a one-off. Nikolai wouldn't have just jumped ship and changed his mind if there wasn't very good reason, and the pandemic and everything that went around that and the travel restrictions was that reason. So, this year was made so much more difficult in so many ways because of so many different things, the pandemic, Brexit, and of course Poland's decision. So, it's something that we've got to get over, we will get over, and we've got to improve our lot. And there's lots of discussions and things going on right now that I feel will enable that to happen, and probably speed that progress up from our point of view quicker than I thought possibly it could do. So, I'm very positive that the next couple of months is going to bring about some change that's going to allow the sport in this country to get back to where it belongs, really, at the top of World Speedway.
And from a promoter's point of view, the $1 million task really is to get people through the gates, isn't it? Get new fans through the gates, people who've never experienced the sport, and get them to attend a few times and hopefully get them into being a Speedway fan, as well as, of course, getting the people in who are what you might call established fans. How do we do that? How do we get new fans through the gates in this day and age when there's so many other ways to spend your time and ways to spend your money? Yeah,
the sport needs to make itself attractive, certainly to the younger generation. We've got a bit of a gap there. That situation is improving, albeit slowly. There's so many things around it. The sport's got to get just simply more competitive in this country. We've got to get some of the top riders back. We've got to get our crop of British young riders moving faster and becoming stars for the future. And I don't think it's any coincidence that, you know, the sport crowd numbers have dipped along with losing clubs. We've got gaps around the country, you know, and when you don't have these local derbies, which a lot of clubs don't have anymore, you know, you're gonna lose fan base up and down the country just because of the big gaps we've got around the country in terms of no speedway. So, you know, we've got to find ways of bringing tracks back, and I don't just mean old ones, because most of those tracks have gone and so are their stadiums. But we need to be building new tracks around the country and filling those gaps.
Coming up then on Humans of Speedway, we speak to Chris Louis about his dream Speedway meeting. Our Speedway Paradise feature continues, and in that we ask a series of 6 or 7 questions about how our guests' dream Speedway meeting would look. From the track they would race on, to who would make their dream team, and who would referee the meeting and the rules they would change. All on the way on Humans of Speedway. This is Humans of Speedway, which is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network, where you can find your next favourite podcast: football, cricket, boxing, NFL, and there's more Speedway content too, in the form of No Breaks, No Fear, the official British Speedway podcast. And you can go back and listen to some of those previous episodes, because, yes, whilst we're discussing the matches of that particular week, some of the guests that we've spoken to have still got great things to say that's still very relevant, no matter when you listen to them. We've been very lucky to be joined by the 2 British champions from this year, the senior British champion Adam Ellis and the under-21 British champion Tom Brennan. We also spoke to Sam Masters, all big episodes from this past year. Go back and listen to those at your leisure. Right now, we're going to design the dream Speedway meeting of our guest in this episode, Chris Louis, an Ipswich legend, in fact, captain of that 1998 Ipswich team that has been mentioned in this feature by previous guests as being the ultimate opposition, the side they'd love to see back together again. Well, will Chris Louis nominate himself, is the question.
I wish I'd prepared myself for this.
Okay, let's crack on with the first question for you then. And what we're going to ask you is, if you're holding your dream Speedway meeting, if you're going to choose a track to race on just for the surface or the shape of the shale, regardless of the rest of the facilities the stadium might have, just purely for your racing, which track would you hold it on?
There's probably there's a few, and none of them, neither of them would be on the radar, I guess. I always enjoyed my racing at Güstrow in Germany. You know, I know it's been seen on the European calendar and stuff, and I don't think it's always shown its best racing, to be fair, but it was always a good fun track to race on. I really liked the track on Gotland, Bisano, when I rode there for the Swedish side. It was a one-off track. It was different. It was quite alien to most riders. It was a good home track to have, but it was really good fun. Don't know where else I could say. Well, have I got to pick one?
You could merge 2 together if you wanted.
Okay, we'll merge those 2 together.
Yeah.
Yeah, Gotland and Güstrow.
And what was it about them? Just the speed or the shape? Or
Neither were particularly fast. They were both probably the shape, because they're both similar in as much as they're sort of almost circles, and it enabled you to make lines that ordinarily you wouldn't sort of think of using. So you could make straights in corners and corners in straights, and that's what makes it hard to defend on. So it just made them good racetracks. You know, when they were prepared right, they were perfect. I guess I could liken for that sort of similar reason in terms of the length of the straight compared to the corners. Bellevue is a bit like that, albeit much bigger than either of those 2. Again, the proportion of the straights to the corners mean that you don't have to necessarily stick to straights and corners. You know, you can turn early or late, and you can have a lot more options. And we see that at Bellevue in the big meetings. We see, you know, the Bellevue fans are lucky; they see it week in, week out for league meetings. So, you know, and it's what we can look forward to for the Speedway of Nations coming up. So, I think for me, I've done a lot of Google research on Google Earth, looking at the length and width of tracks, and there's a ratio point that in my mind makes for the perfect speedway track. And the work that Chris Morton in particular and David Gordon did when they got the Bellevue project off the ground, they looked at what it was going to take and they found the perfect recipe in my mind.
And we spoke to Chris Morton a few episodes ago, actually. So if you've not listened to that yet, dear listener, then do take that into account. But he never really shared a formula for a perfect track. And I think you're the first person to sort of suggest that there is a magic formula almost for the perfect track there.
Yeah, a lot. I mean, I know Chris Morton was he spent many hours looking at various tracks. I know it came down to sort of basing it on the Old Hyde Road and Torren at the time. And maybe in that respect he felt lucky. I don't think so. I think he knew what he was doing. And I've looked at it since then. And yeah, there seems to be the perfect ratio or very small sort of window where that ratio works perfectly in my mind. And that's taking my experience of racing on tracks and watching racing on tracks.
Cool. Okay, that's a good little bit of insight. And if we're going to put your dream hybrid track into a stadium, a good speedway stadium, which stadium would you put that track in?
If I had to blend all of what I've just said together, okay, this is probably what you're after. I'll give you one track in one stadium. We'll just call it Bradford.
Well, yeah.
It's such an atmosphere because it's a big bowl in the ground. It's great.
Yeah. And when it was full, and it was rarely full, but the World Finals I went to there, and it was just incredible. It's like a different place when it was full of thousands of people. And I think back in the 1950s, it had the record for the biggest attendance at any sporting event in the country ever. I think for a while there's like 100,000 people in there.
It was like 100 and something thousand people.
Yeah, ridiculous. Like the 1950s when health and safety didn't exist.
Exactly, no regard for safety whatsoever. But everyone had a great day.
So your all-time 1 to 7 then. Your team of riders can be any rider, any era. No points limits or anything like that. No signing on fees. No points. Money to pay.
Oh, that sounds like a promoter's dream. That's a tough one. I could easily say 98 because it was so much fun, but that would only be a 1 to 6, so that probably doesn't count. I don't know. I mean, there's just a bunch of riders that I enjoyed even as a competitor, and I wasn't a competitor to them all, but that I just enjoyed watching. In my era, obviously I raced against them, but enjoyed watching was Mark Loram, Henke Gustafsson, for sure. Outside of my era, there was guys that I just really admired for the way they rode, like Dennis Sigalos, John Cook, hugely entertaining guy. I'd have to say Dad, obviously, because he's the reason that I even got involved in the sport in the first place. And anybody with a nickname like the Tiger, you don't get that anymore. So
I know.
Couldn't leave him out. I don't think I could leave Jeremy out, Jeremy Doncaster either. Part of the family, and a world number 3, was fabulous at both grass track, long track, and speedway. Obviously, how many have I named there? Are you keeping the list?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Oh no, there's another one to go. Who can I go with for the last spot? Probably, as boring as it may be, because he was my era, and it's difficult because Tony Rickardsson's won more world championships than anybody, but I think I'd have to say Hans Nielsen, to be honest, for how he went about his business. He had, as a competitor, he had an aura about him that made it very difficult to beat him.
Yes, yeah, I remember watching him, and I think I mentioned before, and especially at Bradford, there weren't many away teams who came particularly confident, really, at Bradford always. But Hans Nielsen was just absolutely rock solid every single time you saw him. He was like great wherever he went. Yeah.
So then I could say, Eric Gunderson. There's too many sevens, not enough, I'm afraid. Just take 7 out of that, and there could be many, many more.
It would be a decent lineup, that's for sure. If you're going to pick a referee, then which referee would you go for?
Graham Brodie. He'd done my testimonial by a special request. He did Dad's testimonial by a special request. Just a all-round nice guy. Never had an agenda, and you just felt, even if a decision went against you, it was hard to pick up the phone and swear at him like you might some other referees, because you just knew that he either didn't see it or it was his opinion, and you just accepted it. And I think it was the way he dealt with problems and the way he dealt with riders when he had to. There was no fuss about it.
And if you were going to make Graham's life easier or harder by changing a rule in the current Speedway rulebook, what would be the rule that you would like to see tweaked, and what would be the tweak that you make to it?
If I was going to make a suggestion, as far as I'm concerned, if you don't touch the tapes, let it go. I was a rider that worked hard to work out the referee as the meeting went on. I watched riders today when we're at meetings, and some riders really don't watch any racing other than the races they're in. I watched every race. I was disappointed if there was a panic on in the pits and I missed a race, because I wanted to make 15 starts, not 5 or 4. I wanted to be well aware of what I thought the ref was going to do when the green light came on, and in that period before the tapes went up. So I was, you could say, with that in mind, I was a bit of an anticipator. But you have to, take every advantage you possibly can. It's a short race, and it's much easier to be in front from the beginning. So, I would suggest that if a rider doesn't touch the tapes, the rule should still be that he can't move. But if he doesn't touch the tapes, then he's fair play to him.
And that would make quite a difference, because it would take away the doubts perhaps maybe some referees have when a rider just makes a great start, which is often the way.
Exactly that. I think a rider should be rewarded if he can guess when the ref's going to put the tapes up, because that doesn't happen half as often as people think it does. A lot of what's pulled back is just good starts. Good starts on the basis that the rider is able to fine-tune in with the referee and pretty much know when he's going to push the button. And some riders, particularly I noticed in Germany with German referees, and don't ask me why particularly in Germany, I think it was because of the lack of meetings that they referee. There wasn't so many meetings in Germany. You could actually determine when the tapes were going to go up as a rider. If you moved very quickly, their automatic reaction was to push the button and let the tapes up. So... but as far as I'm concerned, the start is a big thing in Speedway, and it should be a part of the sport in terms of riders and learning what to do. So I'm all for, yes, the rule is don't move, but yes, if you make a great start and you don't touch the tapes, that's fine.
Okay, and a team from any time in history, from any league in the world, to be the opposition to your team. So this is an actual team that existed. So this is the one that opens it up for Ipswich 98 potentially.
Well, I think if you're putting that team together, there's a few there that I didn't really get to race against. So I'm going with 98.
Oh yeah, so that you can actually be involved in it, and you can race against John Cook and Dennis Sigalos and all that.
I can race against me dad, and we can prove once and for all who's better. And I know there's a huge contingent out there that will say the Tiger will win hands down. So.
Yeah, but are you both on laydowns or uprights?
You can ride what you want.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Chris, for joining us. It's been great speaking to you for the last hour or so, and thanks for sharing some of those stories, and all the best for next year, and onwards and upwards in Speedway, as they say.
Absolutely, my pleasure, Ian.
My thanks to Chris Louis for joining us on Humans of Speedway, and hope you've enjoyed listening to his tales as well. Now, if you are new to Humans of Speedway, the good news for you is there's a whole first series to work your way back through. And if you are an Ipswich fan, well, the very first episode was with Scott Nicholls, 7-time British champion. So hear from him in that one, way back in the black and white days. We've also spoken to Shane Parker, of course, has spent plenty of time at Ipswich as well. Jeremy Doncaster features, and Gary Havelock and Kelvin Tatum, all riders that I think we've mentioned in this episode that we've already chatted to. Chris Morton, another one as well, the Bellevue Aces legend. Work your way back through those previous episodes, and I hope you enjoy them, and we will keep the new ones coming on a regular basis right now on Humans of Speedway. Just like and subscribe the podcast on whichever app you use if you haven't already. Leave us a review if you enjoyed it, that would be good as well, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Humans of Speedway.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
Okay, round 2. Name something that's not boring.
A laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Ah, sorry, we were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right, ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.